Most ancient artifacts make sense once you understand the tools available at the time. These 5 don't. A drinking cup that changes color depending on which way the light hits it. A sword steel so advanced that modern metallurgists only explained it in 2006. A 1,600-year-old iron pillar that still hasn't rusted. A lens carved 3,000 years ago that may have been used to look at the stars. And a clay disc stamped, not carved, with a writing system nobody has ever decoded. 5 objects, 5 different civilizations, 1 shared problem. We still can't fully explain how, or sometimes why, they were made. Let's start with something that looks almost like a magic trick. The Lycurgus cup is a Roman glass cup from around the 4th century AD, carved in deep relief with a scene from Greek mythology, the death of King Lycurgus, tangled in vines after offending the god Dionysus. On its own, that's already an impressive piece of glasswork. What makes it strange is what happens when the light changes. In normal daylight, viewed from the outside, the glass looks jade green. But shine a light through it from behind, and it shifts to a deep, glowing blood red. For most of the 20th century, nobody really understood why. The answer only came in the 1990s, when researchers examined fragments under an electron microscope and found the glass is laced with microscopic particles of gold and silver, some as small as 50 nanometers across, smaller than most viruses. Those particles interact with light in a very specific way, now called a plasmonic effect, which is the exact same principle behind some of today's most advanced optical sensors and diagnostic tools. The Romans had no concept of atoms, let alone nanoparticles. They almost certainly arrived at this through pure trial and error in the glass workshop, mixing in tiny amounts of precious metal, firing, testing, adjusting, for who knows how many failed batches, until they landed on a formula that did something nobody could fully explain for the next 1,600 years. And, as far as we know, nobody else made anything quite like it. Only one complete cage cup of this kind survives anywhere in the world. Next, a sword steel with a reputation that sounds almost made up. Medieval accounts describe Damascus steel blades made from a raw material called Wootz steel, originally produced in India and Sri Lanka, as strong enough to hold an edge for years, flexible enough to bend without snapping, and sharp enough to slice clean through a falling silk scarf. You can usually spot a genuine blade by its surface, a swirling, water-like pattern running through the metal. The technique behind it was a closely guarded trade secret for centuries, passed down through specific smithing families. And then, by the early 1700s, it simply stopped. The original ore sources changed, trade routes shifted, and the exact knowledge of how to produce it died out. For nearly 300 years, nobody could fully replicate it. Then, in 2006, a team of researchers in Dresden, Germany, examined a genuine Wootz steel blade under an electron microscope and found something nobody expected: carbon nanotubes and nanowires of a compound called cementite embedded directly in the steel's structure. In other words, smiths working with charcoal forges and hand hammers more than 1,000 years ago were inadvertently producing a nanostructured composite material, almost certainly because trace impurities in the original ore acted as a catalyst during repeated heating and forging. Modern smiths can now get extremely close to the original, but because the specific ore deposits that made it possible are gone, true Wootz steel, in its original form, may never exist again. Standing in a courtyard in Delhi is a solid iron pillar, roughly 23 feet tall, that has been there since around the 4th century, during the Gupta Empire. It has survived more than 1,600 monsoon seasons, repeated heavy, humid rainfall, that should have reduced an iron object this old to a crumbling mass of rust. It hasn't. The surface shows only minimal corrosion, and metallurgists spent decades trying to explain why. The answer, confirmed through detailed metallurgical analysis published in the early 2000s, turned out to be almost accidental. Ancient Indian iron smelting methods at the time didn't use lime as a flux the way later European processes did. That meant the iron ended up with unusually high phosphorus content. Combined with the local climate's alternating wet and dry cycles, that phosphorus helped form a thin, continuous, self-healing protective layer on the surface, a compound researchers call miserwhite. It's not magic corrosion proofing, it's a genuine, explainable chemical process. But it's one that ancient smiths almost certainly didn't fully understand themselves. They simply built pillars this way because, through generations of practice, it's what worked. Modern steel, with lime-based processing and lower phosphorus content, doesn't form the same protective layer nearly as well, which means, in some narrow respect, this 1,600-year-old pillar is more corrosion-resistant than a lot of what we produce today. In 1850, archaeologist Austin Henry Layard was excavating the ruins of the ancient Assyrian palace of Nimrud in what's now northern Iraq, when he uncovered a small oval piece of polished rock crystal, roughly 1.5 inches across. One side is flat, the other is gently convex, ground and polished with enough precision that it has a measurable focal point of about 11 centimeters. By any modern definition, that makes it a genuine optical lens, and it's around 3,000 years old. What it was actually used for is still debated. Some researchers have argued it could have been used as a magnifying tool for engraving the extremely fine detail found on some Assyrian seals and tablets, or even as part of a simple optical instrument. Other archaeologists, including curators connected to the British Museum, where the lens is now held, think it's more likely to have been a decorative inlay or ornamental piece, and that any lens-like optical properties came about simply as a byproduct of the polishing process, not an intentional design. What's not in dispute is the object itself, a precisely ground, genuinely functional lens, made by a civilization we don't typically associate with optics at all, sitting in a museum drawer for most of a century before anyone seriously asked what it was actually for. Our last object might be the strangest of all, not because of what it's made of, but because of how it was made. In 1908, archaeologists excavating the Minoan palace of Phaistos on the island of Crete uncovered a small disc of fired clay, about 6 inches across, covered on both sides with a spiraling sequence of symbols. It dates to roughly 1700 BC. Here's the part that should stop you. Those symbols weren't carved by hand, one at a time, the way almost every other ancient inscription was made. They were stamped, pressed into the soft clay using a set of 45 individual reusable symbol punches, then fired to make the disc permanent. That is, functionally, movable type. The same basic principle Johannes Gutenberg is credited with applying to printing in 1440, except this disc predates him by more than 3,000 years. Nobody has been able to decipher what it says. We don't know the language. We don't know if it's a calendar, a prayer, a board game, or an astronomical record. All of those have been seriously proposed. And there's a second problem. In more than a century of searching, archaeologists have never found a second Phaistos disc, or any of the original stamps used to make it. Just this one object, doing something nobody else in the ancient world is known to have done, with a message we still can't read. None of these 5 objects require a lost super civilization or visitors from space to explain. What they actually show is something almost more interesting. Ancient craftspeople, through generations of patient trial and error, regularly stumbled onto real material science. Nanoparticle optics, nanostructured metal, corrosion-resistant alloys, movable type printing, centuries, sometimes thousands of years, before anyone understood the underlying chemistry or physics. The tragedy isn't that this knowledge was impossible, it's that almost every single time the specific technique died with the workshop, the trade route, or the political collapse that came after it. We're not missing ancient super science, we're missing ancient instruction manuals. So, out of these 5, which one surprised you the most? Tell me in the comments, I read all of them. Next up, we're starting a 5-part deep dive into the actual engineering of the pyramids, starting with the question nobody can fully answer. How did a Bronze Age civilization move and place 2 million stone blocks with that kind of precision? First part drops Monday. Subscribe so you don't miss it.